All right, my name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Greg Van Dyke. We're at Keeler Estate Vineyards in Amity. It's May 28th, 2021. Greg, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
The first question, biggest question, why wine?
It's a good question, of course. It was not my first direction, in high school or college. But I was midway through college and I ended up kind of taking a step back. I was in engineering and mechanical engineering, and 2 years into it, I wanted to kind of take a look at what else I might want to do, because I wasn't totally sure of myself about the time I got that exposure. So I took a year off and I worked for just a friend of mine led me to Ken Wright, and so I went to work with Ken Wright and kind of did a little bit of everything in the vineyard and more in the winery and the cellar, but worked for him for just about a year, and I loved it. I just got a good experience there. I'm from an agricultural background, so I liked that aspect, and wine was exciting to me. I had never, I was aware of it or being around us, but I was still young. I was 19 years old, so I didn't really understand wine yet, but I got a really good first experience there working for Ken, and he's a great mentor, and just learned roughly how to make wine, the very basics, and I wasn't up to any level of wine knowledge at that point at all. So I absorbed a lot, and I was kind of fascinated by the process, and really enjoyed it. Got to appreciate wine a little bit, whereas I had no experience appreciating wine before that. So, like the Pinot Noir, and I actually worked back towards whites from that experience. But really loved the process of winemaking and loved watching people, get excited about wines. I'm from an agricultural background. A lot of times, you just ship your product off, and you get what you get, kind of thing. There's not a lot of direct interaction with your consumer or something like that. There's none of that. So it was new to me to see that, and really enjoyed it. Yeah, it was a good experience for me. And so I went back to school, didn't jump right into winemaking after that, but I had a vision to come back to it eventually, but always kind of staying involved. So that's really why I first kind of got that passion for it a little bit. And I liked a lot of it was just the enjoyment of people, and watching them just really appreciate your product, and yeah, it's kind of exciting to see.
So we come back to that. I got lots of questions to follow up on, but I want to back up for a second. You mentioned agricultural background, so tell me about kind of your early life upbringing and education before wine.
So I grew up on a farm outside of Carlton, just a few miles outside, and we farmed all around Carlton and Yamhill area. My dad, my brothers, I come from a big family, and so I have 4 brothers and 1 sister, so there's six siblings total in the bunch of us. And we were wheat, grass seed, clover, forage, and basically forage and seed products. My dad used to raise cattle to a certain point. We got out of that business in like the late 80s, and because the economy, that all changed, so that market fell out. We kept a few cows around. My brothers and I had raised a bunch of chickens during the summer, just kind of a hobby thing for us, just something to keep us busy when we were really young. Make a few bucks at it. It was fun. You learn from it, and but yeah, pretty much a good sized farm, especially for a single family. We were 1,500 to 2,000 acres, I think, at the peak, and so yeah, definitely appreciate hard work and agriculture, and I love watching things grow and flourish, and so that's definitely a passion, something that's ingrained in you. So yeah.
So you mentioned mechanical engineering as your initial. What was the draw there? What were you thinking you would do with that, and where did you go to school?
I think working on farm equipment as a young, I worked on the farm all summer and sometimes during the regular school year and whatnot in the evenings and late afternoons. But a lot of being a farmer is being a mechanic, and so you learn to work on things. You learn, all kinds of mechanical, whether it's cars, trucks, tractors, and combines, and everything you can imagine, and all your other implements. And so you get frustrated working on certain things, and you're like, I could have made this better, you know. So that was my thinking, but you know, that really, it's there's a lot of ingenuity and a lot of engineering that goes into that equipment, and you know, I think it was a good idea for me. That's kind of what led me into mechanical, but that was my exposure, and I thought, well, maybe I can improve on these things, because I certainly saw opportunities here and there, and as you run them and work on them, you see things you could maybe change or make better. So that was kind of my initiative there. Yeah.
And where did you go to school?
Oregon State University. Yeah.
Figured as much, engineering and all. So.
Right. Yeah. Right down the road.
So you mentioned kind of your first being introduced to Ken Wright. It kind of had to be your first sort of introduction to wine. So I'm curious, as you started to develop how did you educate yourself on wine, on both like the flavor of wine and also sort of the production of wine? What was the biggest educational component for you?
You know, really just being involved in it. It wasn't all on me. You know, you didn't have to understand everything working for another winery. I think when I went to do it more from, you know, myself, I realized all the things I didn't know, you know. So I think that then you just start pulling from, whether it's some classes you take or you know, a lot of us winemakers around you and people around you that, you know, you can learn from, you know, people you're making wine with, people you're making wine next to, people that are down the road, whatever. But I think that's, you know, a lot of it was, does that really answer the right question, or is that an offshoot of that?
No, it does. It does. I'm always curious, because people find their passions different ways, but I'm always curious, once you find that passion, where does that take you next? Like where are sort of the steps you take to understand wine better?
Yeah, I think when I went to New Zealand, I got a whole nother appreciation for wine. I went there and worked at a winery for a little over 3 months, and then I traveled about another 3-4 weeks. But that was a great place, out of Rangi. South end of the North Island in Martinborough, New Zealand, and it was a small, you know, family winery. Has a relationship with Ken Wright. It's kind of that's how I got a connection there, and I think then I realized, you know, the wine world was much bigger than I had any idea, and how much people can really, how much there is to learn. It's a vast. I mean, whether it's the science or the, you know, marketing and everything else, the entertaining and all that goes with it, viticulture, there's so much involved, you know, and then hospitality is a lot of it too, which that's, you know, a whole different business. But yeah, so very multifaceted.
Absolutely. So when you went to New Zealand, what were you thinking at that point? Were you thinking of wine as a thing you would do long term?
You know, it was the downturn of the economy. I had been out of work for about a year. I had consolidated all my belongings and cut all my, you know, kind of liquidated, let's say. Got my expenses down to next to nothing and put it in a box and went to New Zealand, and it was just, it was an opportunity because I had no excuse not to. And I've been thinking about it for a long time, and so it's like, well, you know, I'm not working a great job I can't possibly walk away from right now. So that was an easy answer. So I went over there, and you know, it was a great experience, and I came back and there still wasn't a lot more jobs. And I tried to stay in the wine industry, but there wasn't a lot out there available for, you know, decent paying work that you could do year round. So I ended up back in engineering, as it turns out, but kept in my mind, I really wanted to start making my own label. So that was kind of the push there. I think that was a good reminder of how much I missed it, and you know, good plunge back into it, I guess. Yeah.
Between working at Ken Wright and working in New Zealand, tell me about sort of starting to develop the idea that if you did start your own thing someday, what would it be? How had you decided what kind of wines you'd make and how much you'd make and all of those kind of things? At what point did that start becoming a reality for you?
You know, most of my experience have been with Pinot Noir. That's probably my strongest suit originally, and you know, I learned to make white wines as well. Really appreciated other wines. I mean, all kinds, Chardonnay, Pinot Blancs, and some other obscure ones that are much less obvious. But you know, the list goes on. And, you know, I think working there, I learned some new varietals and some new techniques, as you would, you know, you got to, every place you go, people do things a little differently. So that was exciting to know, you know, there's a lot more out there. But I kind of started with heavy with Pinot Noir. In fact, my first vintage was only Pinot Noir. And I should know, like my youngest brother, Joe, he also went to New Zealand and made wine at another winery at the same time. And when we got back, you know, 2 years after we got back, we started Buds Bloom together. And so we, you know, the vision was, yeah, let's do a couple tons of fruit and make a vintage. And so we did that, and then we did a second year, and after the second year, he works in the wine industry by day. I, you know, as an engineer by day, I go do wine in the evenings and weekends. For him, it was like, I don't want to do wine on the evenings and weekends. So after about 2 years, he said, I'd really like to take a step back from this. And so that's what he did. We kind of left the door open, but he still does wine by day. And I think it was just, you know, a good thing for him to have his free time, you know. So since then I've taken on my own, and so the first 3 vintages we just did Pinot Noir, and then I got into Chardonnay in 17, and then just started doing rosé in 2020, rosé of Pinot Noir. Yeah. So
take me through the process of you have this kind of idea in your head that someday you're gonna do your own thing, and you and your brother decide to start it. So take me through the process of all the things you have to decide on when you're starting a wine brand. So tell me about the name and about finding your fruit and about all of that kind of getting started.
That's good questions, because it kind of gets all of the history in a roundabout way from different angles. Because I'm going to bleed into all different parts of it slowly, but I think you might have to ask me that one again now, because I've just jumped around in my own mind.
About getting started. So tell me about like getting started, finding a name,
the branding,
and finding grapes and finding a place to make wine. All the stuff you have to do to get a brand off the ground.
Right. So our farm is the origin of all this. My dad's farm and my grandfather's farm as well, because he farmed here in the Willamette Valley, Yamhill, Carlton area, and my dad started his own farm. My uncles and cousins, they all farm as well. There's a bunch of Van Dykes out there that farm in the area, as you know. But this one piece of property that my dad inherited from my grandfather that we farmed, I farmed it growing up, my family did, and we eventually, that was the one property we planted to vines in 2008 when my parents retired from their regular farming. So my dad started a whole nother farm, a whole nother job basically. I retired, but now I started a new job. And so in 2008 we planted 20 acres of vines. It's now grown to 30 acres. It was 75%, or let's say 15 acres of Pinot, 2.5 Chardonnay, and 2.5 of Riesling. Now it's grown to just 30 acres total, of which 15 of it is Pinot and 5 of it is Chardonnay. The 2.5 acres has been grafted over to, or the 2.5 acres of Riesling has been grafted over to Chardonnay for economical reasons mostly. I really wanted to make wine out of it. I never got that opportunity really. We did make a little bit, like my brothers and I did a small basket press project the first year it produced anything in the Riesling, and that was a fun little project, but it was subpar, let's say, mediocre, but it was fun, little project, but it was just the first year it was producing barely anything. So but it's fun. But yeah, that's kind of where the name originated, was from my grandfather, who went by Bud. Real name was Robert, but he produced. I came up with that name with my brother. We kind of were bouncing ideas, and we wanted to go back to the roots of, the vineyard, where that originated, where that land originated, where it comes from and its history, and seemed very obvious to give homage to, my grandfather, and even though it's my dad's deal now, but it's kind of going as far back as we could on that history. And it seemed like had a good feel to it. Kind of a warm name. We wanted something approachable. The bloom is really standing for like Renaissance, or kind of the development from the progression from farming to wine growing, to grape growing and wine growing. So that's the idea behind bloom, is kind of that transformation, the new beginning, let's say. Yeah, so that's where we came up with it. But I think wanted to pay respects to the history, and also give something that was different than Chateau Day and so on. So I mean, those are all great and everything, but we kind of wanted to be something new and fresh, and something a little bit more the next generation of wine too. So I think that was a lot of it. But so it was really a collaboration between my brother Joe and I to come up with that, and I think that's been well received. Sometimes it throws people off. Once in a while I get, is there marijuana in that? I'm like, no, but sometimes I want to tell them there is. But I did think about doing a CBD wine years ago, and I was like, well, I don't want to put people to sleep. They're already falling asleep sometimes. So anyway, But before I could get around to it, I talked with the OCC, and they couldn't tell me anything. Like, no, there's really no regulations against that. So I said, oh, should I have asked? Because then about a year or two later, it came up that finally they said, yeah, we can't have CBD in alcoholic drinks, which it's probably a liability anyway, as much as there is anyway. But yeah, it was that. I get that question once in a while. It's kind of fun, but no, there's no marijuana in it.
When it came to, obviously, a whole, like you say, a whole family, a farm going back generations, when it comes to farming wine grapes, was there anything different about it for you and the family? Was there anything new you had to learn, or anything you had to do differently than you were expecting?
Yeah, my father did a very, he did a very in-depth, he did his research. He did a lot of research, talked to a lot of people, and in the industry, kind of found some good resources, and he definitely surveyed different people's ideas of what to plant, how to plant it. There's a lot more than I knew that went into planting a vineyard, for starters. And then, as far as the winemaking process goes, just finding a home to do it and maintaining. I'm in my third location now here at Keeler, and this has been by far the best spot. Great people, great facilities, just a good culture here, good vibe around here. So that's been excellent. But just operating at different facilities has always been different. You're working with all kinds of different people, which is part of the fun in all of it, is all the people you get to meet and people you work with. Make different connections and networking with all different groups around here. But I think that was a lot of it, is trying to find a spot where you can make wine and do it the way you want to do it too. So it's not an easy fit, because there's so many different scales and so many different approaches and practices, and in different places you go, different winemakers, different wineries. So that is pretty much so much depth to that. There's a lot of opinions and a lot of different ideas out there on how to do things. So that's a lot of the fun of it. That's kind of the artistic factor, I guess, right?
So when it came time to find a place to start, what were your options when it came to find a place to start? And what were you looking for, and what did you find?
I was looking for a place that we could do it custom, where I could still have my day job. So needed, some help from the winery. It had to be a winery that had space for us and was open to, first of all, doing custom contracts, because not everybody does. And it wasn't a really common thing, as far as I know, 20 years ago or so. There were kind of maybe one here and there. Now there's hundreds of us that are at a guest at another winery, let's say. That's probably the hardest part, is finding that right fit and somewhere that's, you want to be within the vicinity of your fruit, hopefully, with vicinity of your home, so you're not driving too much, and a place that you can go every day and not run yourself ragged, I guess. You know, because for a while I was in Portland, living in Portland, and then driving out to Laurel Ridge and driving out to day camp, and I moved out here about a year and a half ago. Moved back to actually a property of my family's, and well, eventually I was at 2 other spots, kind of bouncing around trying to find a fit, but I still have my house in Portland. So anyhow, I got rid of that drive, thank God, because it was, you know, could be brutal sometimes, and then talk myself out of going to the winery some days, you know, where I'm like, I should be there, but I just missed traffic, the window, so maybe I'll put it off. But that's a big part of it, having that right fit, vicinity, and all those things, and the culture is huge, because there's a lot of different cultures within the wine industry, for sure.
I'm curious about since you've been at Shared Spaces entirely. You talk about the being around a lot of people with a lot of opinions, a lot of thoughts on things. So tell me about what the advantages to that are of working at a place like Day or here, and what the biggest disadvantages you've found so far are.
You know, advantages. There's a ton of advantages just because you can learn from what other people are doing. You can ask questions. You can get help with things. You know, people actually pitch in and give you a hand, and you do the same for other people too when they need it. But you learn a lot of different techniques, and sometimes it's just food for thought. You know, you might not. You're probably not going to do something exactly the same as somebody else, even if you want to. It's probably you're always going to be doing something a little different. But you take those things and you put them in your toolbox, and you know, you use them as you see fit. But I'm still learning a ton, so I benefit from that a lot, where I can find something from every different winemaker that I didn't know that, which is not saying a lot. You know, I still have a lot to learn. Probably more than a lot of these really, really great winemakers out here, and elsewhere. But yeah, that's fun to learn different things. And the big advantage is you get to meet cool people, and you get to hang out and work together. You know, you deal with a lot of the same issues in the winery as they do, or vineyard for that matter. So yeah, that's a lot of it, I think, is the networking you get, and just all the opportunities that come out of it. And yeah, you kind of learn some cool things, some different techniques that you had no idea. It's like, oh, okay. You know, I'll keep that in mind. Or, you know, sometimes I'll just have people give me a recommendation. I'm like, yeah, that sounds good. I like that better than what I was thinking about doing, you know? And so you learn something, then it helps you sometimes instantly. So it's, yeah, the camaraderie and the community effect. So you get help from all these people that, you know, they're your competition too, but they're really not, you know? I mean, at least the ones right next to you really aren't. It's, you know, it's the bigger, greater masses of wine out there that are in warehouses. That's your competition.
So I'm curious now about the winemaking side of things, about the learning how to make wine and learning how to make the wine you want to make. Tell me about the process for you. What kind of wines did you set out to make, and how did you learn how to make them?
Well, I wanted to make very natural, you know, as natural a wine as I can that's good still. So, you know, what I'm familiar with, I think is where you kind of start. I haven't branched off too much because I haven't had the capacity to expand or do other varietals. I'd love to do more, but because I did just Pinot the first 3 years, you know, so those 3 vintages were kind of much simpler than doing more varietals, but I wasn't getting, you know, I didn't have that whole portfolio, and I still don't really. You know, I have a little bit more of a portfolio and hope to produce more and more varietals as I go here, you know, in the next few vintages. But I think a lot of it is I wanted to make wines that were approachable for anyone, but also still sophisticated and appreciated by the best wine drinkers, the most sophisticated wine drinkers. But, you know, something that anybody could say. And I've had this happen where people are like, oh, you know, I really don't like Pinot. It's, you know, they're a cab drinker, or they like a white Zinfandel, or they like sweet Rieslings or something. You know, they have a whole different palate for wine than say I would. And And I'd be like, I'll try this anyway. You know, I'm at an event or something. I'd pour that wine for them, and they're like, wow, that is really fruity. I expected it to be, I'm like, yeah, that's the thing. I do 100% French oak, but I do, 90% neutral oak. So it really has the same effect on the tannins and the structure of the wine, but it doesn't give it as much. It doesn't give it as much oak or oak tannin as much. But it doesn't give it that oaky smokiness that like a lot of new barrels would have, you know, on a lot of these Pinots out here, or in general, I guess. A lot of wines are a ton more oak than what I produce. But I do all 100% French oak on my Chardonnay as well, and my Rosé. But the Rosé doesn't spend a lot of time barrel aging. It's pretty quick to bottle. My Chardonnay spends some time in the barrel, and the Pinot as well. But yeah, 12 to 18 months, and you know, I like the fact that it doesn't get really oaky, but it still gets refined in the barrel. I try to bring in, you know, not high acidity, but a good level of acidity. So I know that that's going to make the wine pop, and it's going to protect it and preserve it, and also make it also really drinkable. It makes it juicy. Like my Chardonnay is, you know, it's not an oaky, buttery Chardonnay. You know, it has a little touch oak to it, but it's very light. And that's why I like, it's just very easy for, you know, people that, you know, they're really just getting into wine. It's simple. Simple, it's supposed to be kind of, you know, the elements, and keep it basic. You know, don't do any more than I have to do to it. So I want to, you know, not take too much away from just the fruit. And I try to bring everything out in the fruit I can, you know, without overdoing it. But yeah, just that's kind of my approach. Yeah.
So as you, I'm curious about that. Is that what you started when you set out to make wine? Was that kind of the first thing, or how has your approach kind of changed over time as you've grown in your abilities?
Well, it hasn't changed a lot, I guess. I mean, it probably has, but in my mind it doesn't seem to have. But if I gotta really think about that some more, to think about what I'm doing differently, other than making white wine now where I wasn't to begin with, I'm learning a lot of, you know, just how to really protect that wine and make it as bright and vibrant as I can. I think that's really kind of more what I've been trying to develop more and more, is kind of getting more experienced, and also learning how to react to different, you know, adversity in general, whether it's coming from fruit in the vineyard, or, you know, picking schedule, or what's going on in the winery. Maybe it's busy and I can't process what I want to process one day, and I put it off to the next day. That, you know, that has an effect. So it's yeah, working with all those challenge, you know, the surprises, you know, whether it's in processing, you know, at crush, or in the cellar, or at day of bottling, because we all know day of bottling can be interesting. There's always gonna be some kind of hiccup, you know. It's
whatever can happen.
Yeah, exactly. Murphy's Law kind of thing. Something will go wrong.
So it seems like a lot of that comes from sort of confidence. Like, you have to have. I'm curious, at what point did you feel you had the confidence to make some of those decisions and to handle some of that adversity?
Well, I think you just kind of don't have a choice but to. You know, you're like, oh, I committed. I jumped in head first, so you got to be prepared to swim. And I think once I took that on my shoulders more and more, independently, it really started to hit me like, okay, I really have to just learn how to do this, and I have to do it. And sometimes, yeah, the confidence is a big thing, because you always got to be confident in what you're doing. But if you're overconfident, you might screw something up in a different way, I think, too. But I think confidence is a big thing. I see, you know, I can't be cocky, but I know there's a lot of that goes into some great winemakers are definitely very, very, you got to be confident in your skills and decision making, and sometimes you got to make some risky, or, I mean, it's all kind of, you know, you could, especially the bigger batches of wine, right? You know, the more risk in anything you do to them every time you handle that wine, or move it. It's got to be done right. But I think you have to believe in what you're doing, and believe in your fruit and et cetera. It's, so, and then your people too. I don't really have a slew of people working for me, right? So, but I think a lot of wineries have to have confidence in their people to make good wine, and just try not to screw it up.
So along with that, I'm curious if you have a memory of one of those kinds of decisions. Was there a time when you had to make a decision like that, had to take a risk, had to do something that you weren't sure about, and how did it play out? With the smoke taint challenges this year, I think everybody can say that that's a challenge. Even doesn't matter who you are, it's a challenge. And my challenge was, first of all, the question is, am I gonna do vintage this year? Because I don't have a ton of commitment. I don't have a lot of contracts with a bunch of different vineyards. And even if I did, I could, a lot of people backed out of a lot of contracts. And, I saw the challenge was like, well, I want to see what I can do. And I also had to wait and see, gauge what the smoke was doing in the area in our particular vineyard. And you just don't really know until the fruit's in, and because you don't have time to get it tested and make that decision. So you're rolling the dice. Everybody rolled the dice that made wine this year, this last vintage 20. So that first and foremost, and then once I brought the wine in, the question was, okay, do I make more white Pinot or do I make rosé? I considered both, and so I did a little less Pinot this year, and I actually did rosé of Pinot this year, which I've been needing to do, been wanting to do, which I've done in the past, but not under my label. And so I had no excuse not to this year, basically. And I had all the more incentive to do that, because smoke taint would be less, if any bit obvious. It'd be less of an effect on a white wine. You're pressing it off, and you're not utilizing the skins of the grape and the cluster stems and such, because that's really where you're going to pick up a lot of that structure, a lot of that smoke taint. So that was a lot of the challenge, I think, was just deciding, like, what am I going to do? Am I going to actually do vintage, and then what am I going to do with this vintage, and how am I going to make the most of it and take the least? I want to minimize my risks, but I still want to take some risks. I want to minimize, but I still, so there's that cost benefit. And so that's what I did. I kind of waited out a little bit. I'm like, I'm still doing rosé, I'm still doing Chardonnay, of course. And I went and tasted fruit, and you can't necessarily taste it for sometimes years, but or at least till it's in the bottle. It might be a year in the bottle before you can pick it up. I've heard all kinds of things. There's a lot of new information out there, let's say, and we're not really familiar with the smoke challenge out here. Definitely after last year, we learned a lot. I think that I'm grateful that I got to do vintage and that I did make that leap. But I know a lot of people backed out of contracts, and I did end up buying fruit from another vineyard this year because of the fact that it was an open contract. There was tonnage on the vines that people weren't taking. So I took a little bit of fruit from Duver Vineyard, which is just down the road from Janus Vineyard, our vineyard. It's a couple miles down the road, but essentially right next to Saffron Fields. And coincidentally, I was building a house there for the owner of the property as a project manager. And I got to talk to him one day. He's like, so how are you doing on your fruit? Because he knew I made wine, and he asked me, and I said, well, I haven't picked yet. I know people are picking like crazy, but I'm still waiting on. There's different theories, but I figured some rain would only probably dilute that smoke taint, hopefully. There's other theories that the rain could bring more smoke taint to the skin, and they could actually absorb more. But I tend to wait a little longer to get a little more maturity on the actual fruit. Even though the sugar levels are up and the acid might be right, I might still wait 2 more weeks for a little more rain and a little more sun to kind of get that stem to turn more brown, get rid of the green, and get the seeds to be really brown. So same kind of thing, whereas this year I waited, and I got to talking to him though, and he said, yeah,
I have a lot of fruit out there that's not being picked up yet, and some people backed out of contracts. So I just took a ton from Duver, and it was a new clone I've never worked with before, 1018. And a lot of people aren't familiar with it, but it appears, and I've heard that it makes good rosé because it has, bigger berries, less skin to juice ratio, I guess. And so either way, I was gonna make rosé out of it, and so I did half of this rosé in Duver Vineyard and half from Janus Vineyard, our vineyard. So a little kind of the first time I've stepped outside of our vineyard to use fruit from somewhere else with this label. And so it's kind of a fun change up, and just bring something different into my winemaking. So yeah, that was a big part of figuring out what to do this vintage, and also trying to capitalize on, honestly, getting a discount on part of that fruit, which every little bit helps. It's fruit's expensive, especially Pinot.
You talked earlier about you're always surrounded by people and a lot of different thoughts on wine and winemaking. So when it came for 2020 specifically, and you were dealing with smoke, you're obviously hearing a lot of different opinions. So how do you kind of figure out your path forward while also kind of heeding other people's opinion?
Yeah, I mean, there were some people that were doom and gloom, and there's some people that said this isn't, there might be some issues, but we're going to make the most of it, and we're going to mitigate all those issues as much as possible. So I mean, a lot of people that I know in the industry, people that got me into the industry, got me interested to begin with. I listen to their advice, and other winemakers I'm making wine next to. People that I appreciate their opinions and their expertise, and some people that have had experience or know some people or they had experience in Tasmania or Northern California with smoke taint in previous vintages. That I'd take a little advice from here and there, and you read some different things, and I can't say I read a ton of journals or anything. You kind of hear a lot of different stuff. There's a lot of noise going on at that point, and winemakers always get, I don't know what the word is, but kind of, let's say, anxious. They get a little bit crazy in September, August, September, October, because it's when you make your whole year happen, in that month or two, besides all the viticulture aspect, but just as far as what you're doing for crush, what you're doing that vintage and bringing fruit in. So harvest is a high energy, fun time, but it's also, you got to make decisions on the fly constantly, and sometimes you're making your bounty for the year, really. So, yeah. So tell me about the growth of your brand a little bit. You mentioned just making 3 Pinots to start. You've obviously expanded in terms of what you're making, but tell me about the growth in terms of production size and in terms of sort of marketability. How are you selling wine, and how has that changed, I guess, from the start? Yeah, I think I'm making as good a wine as when I started, if hopefully better, or more multifaceted for sure with different varietals. But like this label, done by a friend of mine that I grew up with, Nate Brown. He did this with charcoal. Just gave him some photos of my grandfather, and we manipulated those photos to have the content we wanted, which is the hat with wheat on it as a farmer, and he's got the grapes in his hand. So that's kind of like we were talking about earlier, the buds bloom. So that was the origination. This is 2015, so this is the 3rd vintage, but kind of kept going back to the roots, going back to the beginning, and paying it forward, I guess, the family, the family tradition, lineage. And then I still wanted to keep that farming roots, history aspect, and working the land and stewards of the land. And so I was trying to figure out what image I wanted to work with, and so that's when I came up with this tractor idea. And a friend of mine who's a great artist up in Portland, Terrence Gasca, he's done some other pieces of art for me, whether they're my friend's dogs that passed away, or just, he does all kinds of urbanscapes and does some interesting portraiture and some really cool stuff. But great painter. And so him and I have been talking about it for a while, and I finally, you know, caught him when he wasn't too buried in work, and said, hey, let's talk about this, because I've got some ideas, you know, what I want to do. You want to pour that? Sure. This is the 2007, this is my first Chardonnay, the 2017 Chardonnay. It's unfiltered and unfined. It's got some layers to it. Where did I leave off there?
You just found a time for your artwork there.
So we talked about some ideas, and I kind of tried to get this image to him what I wanted. I wanted to bring color to it. I wanted to bring it a little abstract, but I also wanted to bring the farming theme, you know, to link this all together, and to keep that focus, I guess. So pulled some different images out and said, I like this about this one and this one, but kind of picked things we liked about different images, and him and I, you know, bounced it back and forth some different ideas, and he ran with it, and he came up with, this is the closest to the original, this label here, the Chardonnay. That's essentially like, you know, it's close to the original painting he did in oil. The original painting in oil, which is, it's about a 10 by 10. And so then we manipulated that a little bit for this label to make the Chardonnay, and then also the Pinot, which was next. It's 2017 Pinot. And then the Rosé was one I was really excited about, because I was like, I really want like this pink tractor that's kind of, it's fun, it's, you know, it's playful, it's not too serious, but it's still got that same message. Little bit psychedelic to it, you know. I kind of like that look to it. I think it's really an exciting label. And then the idea too on the back of these was to, you know, put all the information on the back, just make the front all about art, and so you know, you got to pick it up to find out what it is, for one. But I like that too, just giving respect to the artwork and that Terrence did. So it's been a great label so far. People are really enjoying that. I think that's kind of what I'll kind of keep developing and expanding on that, whether it's, you know, I think we'll be doing some more paintings and whatnot, working on some new ones for the next vintages. But something in this theme, I think, is kind of the way forward.
How about selling wine? What's obviously a big challenge for people? Tell me about learning how to sell wine, and about putting yourself out there with your name on the label there.
Yeah, you know, that's the hardest part. I mean, it's the easiest part and it's the hardest part. You know, sometimes it's really easy to sell wine, but the fact is you have to sell wine before you can make more wine. So I'm not really a salesperson. I think I can sell my wine all right, but I'm not experienced in sales. I don't do sales for other wineries. I never have. So I'm learning a lot in that, and it's learning what the landscape is, where I fit into it, how I fit into it. Getting myself out there. I'm not a super extrovert. I do like to. I'm a little bit of both. I know everybody says that these days, but it's true. Yeah, I like that. I'm an introverted extrovert. You hear that all the time, right? But truly, I am a people person, but somewhat of me doesn't want to be like a transparent, open book too much either. So that's a challenge for some folks. Want to know and know all about you and know how you did this wine exactly in every detail, and you know. But it's the casual part of it I really enjoy. It's the formal stuff is a little tougher for me, because it's like, you know, you got to put on your their formal kind of your formal face, and catering to that type of tasting and pouring and selling is different for me. I mean, most of the time most of the events are really fun, and people are, you know, really enjoyable and having a good time and excited about the wines and meeting you and you know, other winemakers around. And but yeah, the most challenging part, I think, is you always got to be on it, you know, year round. And then there's two fall and spring, really really the height of, or the two peaks of sales for the year. Mm-hmm. So you got to be on it during those times, and you got to be in front of people. And it's really how you present yourself, how you present your wine is, it's infinite how many different ways you can go about that, and doing it right or wrong or somewhere in the middle. But it can be a lot of fun, but it's certainly like you gotta, I really like the winemaking more. But like I said, part of what got me into making wine was I liked watching people enjoy the product and say, oh, that's, and appreciate it like you do,
That's really good. Gotta get back on track here, thinking about wine. So I'm curious, especially if you have any memories of sort of the first time you took wine to market. Tell me about pouring wine for someone to taste it and that reaction, like dealing with kind of like being out there and having people judging your wine.
Yeah, I think the first time or two I poured wine, I just expected it would sell itself, which it kind of did. It was really good wine, really nice wine, especially for my first vintage too, whatever. But the first couple times was like, oh yeah, this is just gonna, knock people's socks off, because it's your product. You're excited about it. It's just like when you cook for yourself. You're more excited about your mediocre dinner you make at home than some really good restaurant that just didn't get it perfect. So if that makes any sense, but I think it's just you think it's going to be a little easier than it is, and you go, oh, okay. I mean, people, even if they love your wine, you still gotta sell it, So that was a new thing for me, because I didn't really ever have any experience in that realm at all. It's always in the production side, so that was a new awakening for sure. But it gets better and better, and as I find my place in the market and my approach, and develop it, it gets easier, and hopefully that just turns into a snowball effect, right? But it's still a big part of making wine is selling it.
What have you found to be the most successful venues or avenues to sell? Have you found festivals or direct to consumer or distribution, or what's been most successful for you?
I just now have distribution other than myself, just recently, and that's been refreshing. That's been a nice uptick, but it's still just getting out of the ground with my brand. So, that's exciting. Really, direct to consumer, I do enjoy. I think these small to medium sized events, wine events, ones especially that are focused on, whether it's our particular AVA, which is Yamhill Carlton, or at least for me, that's all I have right now is Yamhill Carlton AVA. Those specific events, certain festivals, and there's all, so many different types. I've been to some where it's a mixture of wine and this and that. Been to some where it's like kind of like that, but even more like a carnival, so there's, it can be entertaining for sure. Like, yeah, I kind of get a kick out of them once in a while, but they're always fun and people are having a good time. Most people aren't too critical, even if they want to be.
Not at least not while you're in your shot, right?
Yeah, exactly. At least not right, face to face, exactly.
So you talked a bit earlier about the 2020 harvest. Obviously, the other issue in 2020, of course, was COVID. I'm curious for you personally. Tell me about sort of the immediate after effects of the pandemic, of the shutdown, and sort of what you had to do last year to make things work.
Right when COVID hit, and everybody came to the realization what was going on, and then the shutdown, right when that happened, I had just worked out a deal or two with another distributor that I'm not working with, and it would have made my whole year different. It would have been too easy, right? So that went right off the table. As soon as shutdown hit, they pulled back the reins and backed out of all those orders, or at least mine anyway. So yeah, that was a rude awakening right out of the gates for COVID. but I just had to supplement my business more than I would have hoped for the year in order to get to the next vintage. Not to mention, I moved wineries, I moved houses, all in August and September, going into harvest. And I just bottled, and I was working on a new label, and the list, So that's kind of how I was going in too many different directions. So that was a lot of it. Was, I don't have employees, so I didn't have that challenge. But definitely, everybody's got a different opinion and sensitivity to COVID, and really here, people were professional about it, safe about it. We don't have large groups of folks working during harvest, so there wasn't that aspect. For the most part, you're keeping space and you're not working too close. But we still had to be mindful, and it changed the feeling. Last harvest definitely felt like it was an uphill battle, but all in all great so far. So it was not without its struggles a little bit. You just kind of had, especially when I was moving from day camp to here, all doing it all solo. I mean, every bit of it. And so, I'm moving full barrels, 30 barrels from day camp on a trailer down here, and then all the bits and pieces otherwise, and then just getting ready for harvest was not easy because there's just so much going on, and everything was a struggle. You just going to the grocery store, right, was not easy during 2020 for a while. It was just like, yeah. So it made things a little trickier, and definitely supply. Supply has been a little tougher. You can't get, your packaging, your bottles, all that stuff is a little harder to get in a timely manner and have as many options. So you're fewer options, and got to plan ahead a little bit more, I guess, or just take a little more delay. That happens too. So, but all in all, probably didn't. I think the big effect for me too was all the event. Typically, I sell a lot of my wine at events, and so I lost all those events because I don't have a storefront. I rely on those events a lot, and I should have worked more on my website and gotten my point of sale going more online, but because that would have benefited me, and it would have been a definite advantage for me, comparably. So, but I did try to get out there and sell to existing customers, consumers that I already have, friends, family, and everybody else that's been seeing me at events and followed my wine. But yeah, the restaurants dropping off and the bars and stuff, I had to start trying to get more retail placements, and because those were the only things selling, So more retail placements, and then trying to get those existing customers more wine again. So luckily you got some loyal followings that help keep you afloat a little bit. So but yeah, that and isolation like everybody else had to deal with. I live at home with my dog, so I had to find ways to just get outside and
see humans.
Yeah, see humans, not just talk to my dog or myself all day. Yeah.
You talked about moving to a different winery space. It reminded me of a question I wanted to ask you earlier. Obviously, every place you work, different materials, different equipment, different setup, different kind of timeline. Tell me about adjusting to that as you move from place to place, and of how long does it take you to feel at home in a winery?
Here, at Laurel Ridge, I was more. Here I do 100% of my winemaking. At Laurel Ridge, I had more help from their staff. I make all the calls and do the harvest and a lot of the cellar work, but sometimes they would have a little more involvement there, and that's tapered down. When I went to day, it was more of the same, but then more me increasingly all the time. And like I said, now here I'm at Keeler. 100% of what goes on. I get some help from people, but it's been really easy here in that way that people are all showing you how to work a new piece of equipment, that I've not used that press before. What are your press cycles? And just getting their input and what they recommend. And a lot of times you have to go with their testimony. Okay, I like this one for this wine and this one for this wine. So I'm like, okay, that sounds good, And that's new. It's new to me, and so I got to test this press cycle, and then it might not press it enough, and so I'll go another, fraction of a bar, and find out. It's just a little slower. You're trying to find your way around. Mm-hmm. You're trying to understand where all the parts are, how to work all the equipment. And it's been really nice here because, like I said, everyone has been really helpful, and the Keeler staff, and Nick with Authentique, he's a good friend of mine, and he's helped me out a little bit, and so that's made it pretty easy to fit in here right away. And then the same thing when I was at day camp, Eric was there, and Eric was great to work with, Eric Berg, and had a good time making wine over there with other winemakers there too, and Laurel Ridge too. It's really about having those good people around you. Mm-hmm. So that's made it pretty easy. But I think Keeler's been a good fit for me. There's just the whole package deal here. There's just all the parts are in play. They got space is the most important thing. Because every winery is always maximizing. They're always trying to maximize the use of their space. And if they're not, then they'll find somebody that will, I guess, is what way it goes these days, it seems like.
So as you look ahead then for yourself and your brand, what's next? What's sort of the ideal dream outcome, and what are the steps you're taking next as Buzz Bloom grows?
When I was in New Zealand, there's a couple wineries there in Martinborough that were just basically like a big garage, more or less. They weren't a big operation, but you could tell they had a good time making their wines. They didn't have really fancy equipment. They didn't have all this, which, I'd love to have a big fancy establishment, but, with that comes more everything, more staff, more maintenance. I mean, not to mention you got to have the capital to build it, first of all, but then to maintain it and run it, and there's a lot that goes into that. How big a business you want to build, and for me, I think of it as being simple and smaller, and I'm always kind of like doing 2 or 3 things. So I'm probably going to do wine with this and maybe a little bit of that. I don't know if I can be 100% into anything as far as that goes. I mean, as much as I love it, and like I said, there's such a multifaceted business. You have to know all these things. You got to really be a jack of all trades, which is kind of what I've always done. But yeah, I could see myself, building a small winery and getting my own thing established. That's where I'd like to go, and finding the right place to do that. And but still, all the time, I'd like to think I could keep it simple. Yeah, I probably won't have the traditional tasting room. It'll probably be something a little different. Might be just a part of the winery, an outdoor setting. But I'd like to keep making these wines and expand on them and doing more than one Pinot per year. Maybe start doing different blends. Whereas as to date, I've only fully blended all my clones back. I mean, I do clone specific, and I thought about keeping a barrel separate or that clone separate, or even a combination of in that one barrel separate. I just still always end up coming back to just blending it all back together. But I got to keep it basic to this point, and now as I have more time to invest in it, hopefully I can expand on the varietals, expand on within the varietals with different labels within the varietals. So that's, I'd like to develop that more in the next couple of years. But yeah, it might be a bit before I have my own facility, let's say. Could be a bit, but it's, if I can maintain here for a while and make some nice wines here with these guys, it's a great place to be, and good people to work with, really a great family.
So I'm curious if you mentioned your first experience with Oregon wine, working with Ken Wright. I'm curious, as you started to work in the industry and try some of the wines, what was your first impression of the Oregon wine industry? What were the first things that you kind of thought about when it came to Oregon wine?
You know how small it was when I first got into the industry, and now it's about 3 times as many wineries as it was 20 years ago. I think there was under 300 wineries around the turn of the century. So I think it's grown. It's like the whole, the culture is different. It's bigger, but I think back then I really liked the agricultural side and the simplicity of, back to that word, simplicity, but back to, back then it was just a small, tighter knit community, not as many players, not as many big players for sure. And it was just really still the original, really the pioneers, right? The 4 or 6 or whatever point we want to say. But there wasn't a lot of people in the 70s here, in the 80s, and even in the 90s, there was still just a lot of the people that really started this business up here, this industry. So yeah, it's amazing that sounds like 20 years ago, but for me anyway. But it's changed a lot in the last 2 decades up here. So it used to be such a much smaller industry. It is still a pretty small community here today, but yeah, the production is vastly different. The size of the wineries, the number of the wineries, so it's grown pretty exponentially, I'd say. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see where it goes. There's still just more and more incentive for wineries to move from elsewhere in the world, and there's a lot of opportunity here. So I think people know that, but it's more and more Oregon's becoming on the world map for wine, which is exciting to see, because it was like, even when I first got into wine, got exposed to wine making, a lot of people didn't really realize there was wine in Oregon. I mean, if you were from outside, even if you're in Oregon, a lot of people didn't know that there was wine in Oregon, which is
Oregon wasn't on a map.
And now it's totally different. Now it's like, oh yeah, Oregon wine country. Oh, the Willamette Valley. Everybody knows that, even if you're not in the industry or even if you don't drink wine.
So with that change, with some of the changes you talked about, and you mentioned the future, I'm curious, what do you see as you look ahead for Oregon wine? Are there things you're excited for happening in the industry? Are there things you're concerned about?
Oh, I mean, yep.
Shouldn't ask yes or no questions.
I mean, climate is a thing. That's a concern. I mean, with climate change and water rights and property value and, disease, and that's the downtrodden side, or some of the challenges we're going to have to face, or we're going to have to adjust to, we're going to have to adapt to. We could be grafting over all this fruit, right? All these vines right here to a different, warmer varietal, before you know it, which is concerning in the long term, for sure. It's also concerning for what the hot climates are going to do that already grow those hot varietals that are going to get hotter and drier. But water challenges, with availability of water, that's impacted, and that's with the more use of water and the higher population density here. The buzz is good and the industry growth is good, but it's also brings more challenges and more competition is part of it. But it also brings a lot, there's a lot more wines out here. There are a lot of the quality of the wines is better and better with more competition, with more knowledge, just like, again, learning from your neighbors, whether it's in the vineyard or in the winery. I think it'll raise the bar in the Willamette Valley here. So that's the kind of, I think there's, the good and bad from those same points, you know. There's things that we're gonna have to learn to do differently and adjust to, but certainly bringing in more exposure and, you know, this area getting more exposure and more publicity, more marketing with the growth and the big players too. You know, it hurts you in one way, helps you in another way. So you just kind of roll with it, I think, and do it for as long as you can, I feel like, you know, or to what capacity you can, and see how we do. Yeah.
So if someone were to ask you about joining the Oregon wine industry, what would your words of wisdom to them or advice be?
Yeah, you gotta love to do it. I mean, that's for sure. It's not, you're not gonna get rich here. I mean, I've heard of people say, like, if you want to be a millionaire in the wine industry, you know, start with 10 million or something like that.
Be a millionaire in no time.
Yeah, exactly. First vintage. Probably the best chance. Yeah. No, you gotta find your place in it, I think, would be my advice. And whether you want to manage vineyards or you want to make wine, you know, do you just want to work at a winery? Because I mean, certainly building a winery and the full undertaking of physically building a winery and building a brand and making good wines, so much that goes into it. It's almost, you know, it's almost overwhelming, you know, at times. So I think it's kind of what capacity do you want to do it, but don't, because there is the romance and all the appeal of the wine industry and the wine making and pouring wine and there's that whole feel of it. But it's a really tough business. People don't see what goes into all the work out here in the vineyards. They don't see what goes into all of the maintaining a winery properly and just all the work mechanically and not to mention people. You know, you gotta take care of the people that make it all happen. So, but I think it's a fun industry. Does have a lot of opportunity, and I think it's something definitely to, if you're interested, you should just dive in and find out where you want to be, you know.
All right. That's all the questions that I have for you. Is there anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover here today that we should have covered?
Not really. I think we kind of hit on everything, you know, and I could elaborate on stuff, but I guess, you know, back to the brand, you know, my grandfather was, well, out of World War II, he was in Normandy. He got all kinds of medals and a lot of notoriety for what he did there, and then he came back from the war and started a homestead in Wyoming. And so he actually homesteaded in Wyoming, no power, you know, no running water. So a little farm out there, and then he moved out to Yamhill and started a farm out here. So that's kind of the beginning of it all. That's the only thing I really add to the origin of the brand and the family. So yeah.
You know why you chose Yamhill?
Well, that valley, fertile. You know, I think it's probably, you know, land was still cheap, and it was a far different deal. I mean, there's a lot of space out here then, and just such a fertile place to grow. I mean, he came from Cody, Wyoming, which is, you know, very dry, high plains desert, basically. You know, about as many rocks in the field probably as there is blades of grass or wheat. But yeah, I think it's, you know, that's a very pretty area too out there. But yeah, he's a farmer, so that's brought him here. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today, for your stories, for some wine and all the good stuff, and go ahead and let you off the hook.
All right.